The question is that the Amendment 6 to be made. Graham Allen.
I'd just like to address Amendments 46 and 47, if I may, Mr Hoyle. I'm sure colleagues will know that the largest amount of public consultation ever achieved by a select committee was on the voter engagement report, which the Political and Constitutional Reform Select Committee did just before the last general election. And it covered a whole raft of ways in which we as a House, but also we as politicians and politics in general, could re-engage with people out there. We did some technical stuff, and that's really what I want to talk about this evening, and it's the amendments in relation to automatic registration and also online voting. If you believe in devolution, then it is not possible to mandate the nations of the Union to conduct themselves and their democracy in a specified way by the centre or even by the federal parliament. There has to be a degree of discretion and the degree of trust, particularly when you have an institution of the status of a parliament in one of our nations. But I would argue also that will apply or should apply to an assembly, to an executive, and when we get devolution in England, it should also apply to the means of devolution in England, and I would argue very strongly that that should take the form of constitutionally separate local government, which is commonplace in every other Western democracy apart from our own. If you believe in that, and if you believe that there can be a rich diversity of approaches to our democracy to suit national and local characteristics, then I think one of the key things that we can all start to do is to ensure that our colleagues in the Scottish Parliament and in the Scottish Government maintain and extend the discretion on things such as automatic registration and the online voting suggestion that my select committee came up with in its report. We are not suggesting, obviously, because it would be out of order, but we're not suggesting that this happens overnight in other nations, but what we are saying is we're in the middle of discussing the Scotland Bill, and it is highly pertinent to say if the Scottish Parliament wish it, if their representatives wish it, then they could take forward proposals, as they did so innovatively in the referendum on votes for 16 and 17-year-olds, that they could take forward a proposition about automatic registration. I think that's important because it allows everybody to participate. I think it's also important, if I may say so, because we have this very false dichotomy about your boundaries will change unless your registered electors meet a certain number. I will explain to the honourable member. I'll get in there very slowly. If you have a small number of people registered, that doesn't mean that you have a small number of constituents. In fact, some colleagues argue very strongly. Some of the people who give us the highest numbers of casework items are people who are not on the register. Are we to say, no, we're not going to help you? Sorry, you're not on the register? Of course not. But automatic registration, which is quite possible through a whole number of devices, and I'm going to ask the honourable member questions afterwards, so I hope he's paying attention. I hope that through DWP registration, for example, through credit ratings, through lots of other possibilities, through council tax forms or whatever, absolutely possible to make sure that registration could be almost automatic. And I see distinguished members of the Political and Constitutional Reform Select Committee nodding eagerly in approval of what I'm saying. On the online voting that we looked at, again, 16,000 people responded to our consultation on this, and lots of organisations put out online information and questionnaires for us. The most popular thing that the Select Committee came up with was online voting. It obviously appealed to particular groups of people, but it's clearly one of those things whose time will come very soon. And given that sometimes the other place is innovative, in this occasion, I'd like to say there's so much that we can learn from the way our devolved friends in the Scottish Parliament conduct their business, and why not they be the first to trial online voting in certain very well prescribed circumstances which they would keep an eye on, which they would feel responsible for, and which I'm sure they would make a success. So, Mr Hoyle, I won't detain the House any further on this other than to say diversity, experimentation, creativity are the hallmarks of proper devolution, and these are just two very small ways in which we could encourage our friends in the Scottish Parliament to take devolution that little bit further in their own nation.
Yeah. Wayne David.
Thank you. These are not a clerk's notes, have no fear about that. There's two issues I wanted to focus on. First was individual electoral registration. We know full well that individual electoral registration is imminent. There is some debate with the Electoral Commission conducting their assessment of the completeness of the registers, or whether or not there will be individual electoral registration introduced at the end of 2016 or 2015. We think on this side of this House that it's absolutely essential that there be a complete register as far as is humanly practicable. And we want to urge the government and indeed all other bodies to make sure that every effort is made to try and get as many people onto the register as possible. What is essential in any democracy, I feel, is that people who are entitled to vote are on the register and they're able to make the choice initially if they wish to make a vote or not to cast their vote. And that's why we think it's important that this be not only a responsibility of central government, but it be devolved a matter as well. And as we have heard, the Scottish Parliament has some responsibilities already with regard to the conduct of elections, and I'm sure the Scottish Parliament shares the same view as ourselves in wanting to make as many people as possible able to vote on the electoral register. And the amendments which we have set out provide practical means of providing that assessment, but also we urge that every consideration is given by the Scottish Parliament to make sure that we do have people on that register. As things stand at the moment, the Electoral Commission have indicated that there are as many as 7.5 million eligible voters who are not registered. Multiple elections are coming up next year, the Scottish Parliament elections, and the government and everybody else needs to take action to ensure that a boost is made to electoral registration. We think that lessons can be learnt indeed from what has happened already in Scotland in terms of the extension of the franchise in the referendum to 16 and 17-year-olds, and the effort which was made to ensure that a special procedure was in place to ensure that there was maximum registration of young people. We think those lessons need to be learnt, and indeed they need to be acted upon and taken much further. Could I say we are particularly concerned about the need to ensure that as many young people as possible, and that there are procedures in place to ensure that college students and university students are able to register, and we would like to see registration as they used to be, en bloc by the student authorities. We also think there's a particular need, given the increase in this sector, of the private rented sector. And the government should be working much more closely with letting agencies to include reminders to register for all new tenants. These issues are very, very important, Mr. Hoyle, and I hope they will be given due consideration. Could I also say that we would like to move the amendment with regard to the election, or the referendum rather, with regard to the European Union. We are fully aware, of course, that the bill on the EU referendum is taking its passage through this House, but we are also mindful too that the very great concern that there is out there in the country, that we do have a proper reasonable, rational and focused debate on Britain's membership of the European Union. And for that focused debate to take place, we believe it's absolutely imperative that there aren't any other elections to take people's attention away from the central direction they'll have to focus on. And we are mindful that the Electoral Commission, who have studied this matter in a great deal of depth, has said unequivocally in its public noticement and its circular to all members that there should be a separation, really, of the European Union referendum and other elections. And I'd like to quote, if I may, what the Electoral Commission has said, because it is very emphatic indeed. They have said, "It is important that voters and campaigners are able to engage fully with the issues which are relevant at these elections. It is also important that any debate about the UK's membership of the European Union takes place at a time that allows the full participation of voters and campaigners, uncomplicated by competing messages and activity from elections which might be held on the same day." Now, that is pretty emphatic by the non-political, objective observers, the people who have the statutory responsibility to ensure that elections and referenda are conducted fairly and honestly. And I would strongly urge that the government accepts that amendment which I'm referring to, and that if the government is not mindful to accept the amendment, then we give notice we would want to press it to a vote. Thank you.